So the heart of the gospel is God's heart and his motive of why he gave his son's life for you. What we began to look at last week is we're living in an age, as we just quoted in prayer out of Isaiah, where truth has fallen in the street, where truth is confusing, and we're being taught, and I'll get into more today, young generations are being taught there is no such thing as truth. And obviously that is Satan's work to undermine the gospel so that they will not have trust in the faith in the gospel or the God that loves them and has given his son's life for them. But I just wanted to start by looking at this because this is something that the scriptures foretold was going to happen. And Paul wrote a letter to Timothy, and we looked at this a few weeks ago in another context. He wrote this letter to Timothy near the end of his life and ministry. And we'll start in verse 2. He says, preach the word, because that's the answer to what's going on. Preach the word, be ready in season or out of season. In other words, when it's popular and when it's not popular. And when you preach the word, convince, rebuke, exhort with all long-suffering and with teaching, which is what we're doing this morning. And this is why. For the time will come when they, this is the church, will not endure sound doctrine. It'll be there, but they won't put up with it. But according to their own desires, because they have itching ears. You know what an itch is? This is the time of year when mosquitoes come out, and they like to suck on your blood and replace your blood with their saliva, and it causes this itching sensation, which we call a mosquito bite. And what do you want to do when you get a mosquito bite? You want to itch it, because there's a scratch there. I discovered something a long time ago, that if I don't scratch it, it goes away. Because the deceptiveness of a mosquito bite is when you scratch it, you spread it. This is a little different lesson, but if you scratch it, you spread it. The same is true of itching ears. The same is true of any desire of your flesh. The more you try to meet the desire of your flesh, the more you want it. The largest selling sodas are like Coca-Cola and Pepsi. And Pepsi's even worse than Coke, because what do? It's the pause that refreshes, but it doesn't refresh because it's full of sugar. And of course, they have Diet Pepsi, which isn't full of sugar, but it's something that's sweet. Why? Because the sweet makes you want more of it. Because they're in the business of selling it, so they're not giving you something to satisfy you. I'm not against Pepsi. If you love Diet Pepsi, Coke, go for it. But understand this, it won't satisfy you. It's designed to make you want more, so you'll buy more of their products, so they'll make more money. And so it doesn't satisfy. And so itching ears refer to things we want to hear that won't satisfy us. But notice, because of their itching ears, they will heap up for themselves teachers. Verse 4. And they will turn their ears aside from the truth. We're talking about what is truth. To be turned aside to fables. We talked about this a few weeks ago, again, in a different context. The contrast here is between truth that we need to hear and see and fables that are being offered to us that are attractive to our flesh. And I talked to you about what the difference between a fable is and truth. A fable is a story that man's made up that's designed to teach some kind of principle or some kind of moral or some idea in the story of a story. And one of the ones I use as an example, it's not technically a fable, I guess, but it's an example of that, is the three little piggies. Remember who built the three houses? And the wolf came along to huff and puff and did not blow their house down. And the first pig made his house of straw, and it was no challenge for the wolf to blow it down. The second pig made his house of sticks. That was no difficulty for the wolf to blow the house down. And the third pig made his house of bricks, and the wolf couldn't blow it down. And the lesson of the story is whatever you make your house of determines how well it can stand against the wolf trying to blow your house down. Sounds wonderful, doesn't it? And then I remember Jesus taught a parable. Jesus, the truth, taught a parable about two houses that went through a storm. And one house fell, and the other house stood. But the difference in the house that stood and the house that fell was not the materials the house was made of. The difference in the houses that stood and the house that fell was what the house was built on. And here's a powerful difference between a man-made fable and the truth of God. Because the underlying assumption of the three little piggies is that what you build into your own life will determine how strong you are. What you build into your life. What Jesus is teaching is it's not what you build into your life, it's who you build your life on and what you build your life on. And that's a subtle difference, but it's the difference of eternal life and death. And there is a philosophy that's out there in the world right now that started about halfway through the last century, the 20th century. And the term that's used is postmodernism. Modernism, post means after or following. Modernism refers to the basic view of reality and of life that came out of a time in the 17th century, 18th century called the Enlightenment, the Age of Reason. It's when man began to realize that through our thinking, through our reasoning processes, we could come to the knowledge of the truth. And we may not all agree on how that's done, but the goal was there's a truth out there we can discover, and we'll just use our mind to get there. So there was always, at least there was an agreement that there's a real truth out there we can discover, and we discover it with our mind. What happened in the last part of, middle of last century, the 20th century, is that some people began to look at the world and the society and say, it's not working. With all this enlightened thinking and reasoning, where have we gotten to? So just maybe there's no such thing as truth. And that's what they began to conclude. So postmodernism is the view that we're throwing out. That didn't work, so we're going to look at things from a fresh point of view. And here's what they've come up with. And I'm going through this because I want to show you in a few minutes how that's working in our society today very subtly. And again, I'm not here this morning or through this series to take somebody that believes in postmodernism and change your thinking. I can't do that with my reasoning because you won't believe in reasoning. I'm here to teach the church. My purpose is to teach the church so that we can discern the lies that are out there, the fables that are out there, because they don't come to you advertised as postmodernism. They don't come to you advertised as a fable. They've saturated our society. They're all around us. They're through our media is saturated with it on all sides of the media. Our entertainment industry is saturated with it. So unless you're just reading the Word of God, everything you read, everything you hear, everything you listen to has this interlaced in it, has this as its underlying message, and we're going to see that as we walk through this. So I want to go back over some of the basic principles, which is kind of an irony because they don't have principles, the basic principles of postmodernism. The first principle is this. Well, let me back up a second. The first principle is truth has no corresponding reality. Let me explain to you what that's talking about. During the age of enlightenment, during the age of reason, the concept, the idea of truth was typically defined as as a reality that's actually out. The Pastor Kurt's guitar is a reality, okay? But the only way I know that reality is I can see it. That's how I know it's there, or I can touch it. And now I can hear it. So I know it's there. All right? So truth is something I believe or see that actually corresponds to something that really is. So if what I see or what I believe does not correspond to that, then it's not the truth. So let's suppose, I got something in my eye and my eyes get all watery, or suppose I needed my glasses to be able to see that clearly, and I look at it and I say, I think it's a guitar, but I think it's a 12-string guitar. That would not be the truth. Why? Because what I'm saying does not line up with what it actually is. It's a 6-string guitar. Everybody follow me so far? So that's how truth has traditionally been defined. Postmodernism says there's no such thing as the guitar. It's a little hard to work with, but you'll see it as we walk this out. There's no such thing as a guitar that's really there. All that exists is my impression of the guitar. There may be some of you out there that are colorblind, and when I say it has a brown face on it, you'll say, no, it's got a gray face on it. So what they say is they look at the fact that we're all influenced when we look at something, when we look at what we think is truth, we're all influenced by our biases, by our preconceived ideas, and have you ever been in a situation where, and I've had this happen a number of times, where you'll see somebody in a place where you're not expecting them and you walk right by them, or you'll see, because I'll have people look at me, oh, Pastor John, and they look at me because they think I live in a suit with a tie on. And I'm in my shorts and a t-shirt, and they're kind of shocked because they're not expecting me to be there, so they're not sure whether they really saw me or not. Ever have that happen? So what these postmodernists do is they say, okay, that means that I don't know whether it's because all we're basing the reality of that guitar on is we all think we see it. Just follow me out. So what they teach is that there is no such thing as a absolute reality, as a corresponding reality. And listen carefully. Instead, reality is something we form for ourselves out of our own biases, our own experiences, and our own understandings. We form our own idea of what is truth for me, and we'll see how that works. They do that because they believe that there is no such thing as absolute truth or an ultimate truth. There is really no truth that we can search for together. So we're all coming together today for no reason at all. Because you're here, hopefully, because you want to know what is truth. We're all here together to find truth, and we have to believe that there's a truth to find. But they say there is no truth to find. That's an illusion. There is no ultimate truth. It's only our experiences that matter. Now listen carefully to this. This is one of their cardinal teachings. Self is the source of truth and reality. In other words, I'm the source of what's true for me. And Bruce is the source of what's truth for him. And Kim is the source of what's truth for her. And that makes for an interesting marriage. I'm joking. But that's what happens sometimes. Here's a direct quote from one of these men. Anything can be made to look good or bad based on how it's redescribed. So they teach reality is formed by our words. I'm not going to get into this now, but as I was thinking about that, that's biblical. That's biblical. Life and death are in the power of the tongue. It's the power of confession. But we can only confess and call into being that which God has already willed, not what I decide I want it to be. But I don't want to get off on that right now. So reality is created by our words. Anything can be made to look good or bad by just being redescribed. So number one, truth has no corresponding reality. There's no such thing as absolute truth. The second principle, all religions, all society and political views of the world are myths, M-Y-T-H-S. They call them meta-narratives. In other words, any attempt to explain how things work in the world is just an illusion, because you can't do that because there is no truth. And of course, what this does is completely undercuts all religion, and especially Christianity. Number three, there is no ultimate foundation upon which knowledge can be based. There's no ultimate foundation on which knowledge, so you can't really ultimately know anything. Number four, this is very dangerous. Objectivity is an illusion. Objectivity means you and I may disagree on something, but we have the ability to be objective about it. Subjective means I base everything on how I feel or what I think. But objective means I'm able to distance myself from the issue and look at it objectively. And what they say is that is an illusion. You can't really do that. So what they teach is what's called objectivity is simply prejudices that are used to oppress people. But I don't have time to get into that this morning. Fifth principle, truth is whatever works for me. It's called pragmatism. Whatever works for me must be true. And it makes no difference, and this is a direct quote, it makes no difference which it is. It either works because it's true, or it's true because it works. It doesn't matter. As long as it works, it must be true. Okay, now I know I bored you stiff, but you'll see how this begins to apply in our life. You need to be patient. It is very important to have some basic understanding of these things because they're out there everywhere. And they're trying to deceive you. They're trying to deceive us and to undermine our confidence in God. And they're trying to destroy the next generation. Again, I'm not trying to convince anybody that believes in postmodernism, but I'm trying to prepare the church to deal with these deceptions. Now, let's talk for a minute about the consequences of these views and what they mean and how we begin to see signs of this in our society. First of all, because there's no such thing as absolute truth or reality, in our entertainment world, in our media, there's no longer a clear line between fantasy and fact. There's no longer a clear line between fantasy and fact. So you have all these movies out there like Avatar and Harry Potter and all these things which are fantasies that are attractive to young people and they're, wow, that's neat. But they begin to draw conclusions about the reality from watching these fantasies and they can't tell the difference. Because the underlying message is there is no difference. Here's where it really gets interesting is when you bring it over into our news media and it's on all sides of every issue. I've shared this with before because I was trained in words. I mean, I was a philosophy major in college before I was saved. And as a lawyer, words were the very thing I worked with. Those were my tools of my trade. And of course, as a pastor, as a teacher, words are critical to me. Understanding of words is very important. And to learn to be precise with words. We're raising generations that only know how to grunt. What's up? And we think that's harmless. I'm not picking anybody, but your ability to articulate yourself is directly tied to your ability to understand and perceive. If you've ever watched the Ken Burns series on the Civil War, and he used a lot of letters from just ordinary soldiers writing home. Most people today couldn't even understand those words because they were very articulately written. If you read just the letters of some of the soldiers in the Revolutionary War back home, some of our professors couldn't understand what they were saying because they thought for themselves. They were taught to think. And nowadays, we're not taught to think. In fact, we're taught not to think. We're taught to feel. We're taught to react, but not think things through. We're being taught as a culture to not examine where things come from. So whatever's out there must be true, because if it's out there, it must be the truth. So we don't discern where something's coming from. People will come and say, well, they said it. So who's they? Because who they are determines how much credibility I'm going to give to what they say. We need to learn to think critically. Okay. So our news media, that's what I was on. If you begin to understand this, you'll realize that almost everything that's said, we'll go back a step. Let's explain it this way. When I was growing up and as a young adult, the news broadcasters were journalists. In other words, their purpose was to take what happened out there and simply report the facts. If they were going to express their opinion to influence you, they called it an opinion or an editorial. There's no such thing anymore. It's all mixed together. The media is no longer there to report to us what they see. The media there is to influence us to what they want us to believe. And it's on all sides. It's on all sides. It's in our entertainment industry. It's in our media. And we'll talk in a minute about the danger of that, or maybe next week. Because each individual defines truth from himself Our society together is the continuing discussion of each one of our views of truth based on respecting one another's rights to their truth. In other words, since we're not seeking truth together, since we don't come together to have a class or a church where we're going to seek truth together, what we do come together to share our own ideas of what's truth for us. And our community is therefore bonds us together as, well, this is what I think, but I respect what you think. Let me show you what that's led to. It's led to an explosion of talk show, which is my view of talk shows and call-in shows, is it's pooling ignorance. You get a bunch of people that don't know anything about what they're talking about, sharing their ideas as if they're truth, and everybody else is listening to it and fighting with one another, but this is what's behind it. I mean, when I came back from Bible school, because I really didn't listen to the media at all. When I came back into this area, I was shocked. Everything that used to be a news program turned into 4 or 5 people discussing the news on the radio, not reporting the news, then getting into arguments, and they never concluded who was right. There was not a debate in truth. They were just all, now I can understand it. They were all expressing their opinions. And then we call in and get engaged in it too. And the idea here, it gets very subtle. There's a subtle danger in this. Let me tell you the other place it's turned into, social media. Now, if you're on Facebook, I'm not criticizing you. You just should spend more of your face time in this book than in Facebook. Because the underlying attraction of Facebook is I want to have a place where I can share what I think's true. And I can listen to what you think's true, and because I'll respect because I'll either like what you said or don't like what you said, even though I may not even know you, and you're going to listen to me but you see, the illusion is people are listening to you. They're not. They're more concerned with sharing their ideas than listening to your ideas. But it's created a powerful community that's a false community. False relationships. Very fragile, very artificial relationships. And I fully believe that Satan's behind that. And I'm not saying Satan created Facebook, but he's behind the philosophy that's underneath it. Now, here's what it leads to. And this is what's beginning to emerge, not just emerge, explode in our culture. Because if you assume that my view is as right, I have as much right to my view as you have yours. I do have a right to my view, but I have a right to be wrong. Because there is a right or wrong out there that my view either lines up with or doesn't line up with. But in postmodernism, there's no such thing as a right view out there. It's right because it's my view. So in order for us to get along, I've got to respect your right to have your view, and you respect my right to have my view. So I have to learn, listen carefully, I have to learn to be sensitive to your view. And you have to be sensitive and tolerant and accepting of my view. Everybody follow me? Yeah. So that's led to this very strong movement out there that everything has to be politically correct. We don't want to offend anybody because they have a right to what they think, and I have no right to make them uncomfortable about what they think. So I'm going through this step by step to show you how this philosophy, this point of view, is being used to affect our society to weaken it. And it's gotten in the church. It's gotten in the church. Because if we all espouse to this, why would we come to church? Everybody ought to get a mic so they get to share what they think. I'm not up here, listen carefully, I'm not up here sharing what I think. I work hard and I pray hard to make sure that I share nothing that's my idea. So what's controlling our society now is this political correctness. We can't offend anybody. And look what that does. That's designed to intimidate the church to keep its mouth shut. That's what's behind it. To intimidate the church, which is the carrier of the truth, to be intimidated to keep our mouth shut, because if we speak out, we're going to be haters of men, when the opposite is true. There's more love in a church for people than there is out in that world.